Travel is good for the soul. Right now, we're in between courses. Travel is food for the soul, but we're in between courses right now. We're savoring where we've been. We're anticipating where we'll go. Eileen and I appreciate your presence and your feedback. I know there's some people on, we can't see each other yet, but I know that Alice and Art and Rose and Greg and Ileana and Sheila and Richard and Jude are all going to be with us tonight, and lots more of our friends. We're so happy you're with us. And we want to heap our boundless gratitude onto our webmaster and conference producer extraordinaire, Mr. Steve Gurney. And we want to thank our supporter, Anoop Mitra, with Cruise Planners and American Express. Thank you, Anoop. And now we'd like for you to meet our newest supporter, the Mather.
Hello, I am Rachel McLean, Community Relations Liaison with the Mather, a forward-thinking life plan community being developed in Tysons for those 62 and better. Our community is projected to open in 2023, and we are currently taking reservations. At the Mather, we recognize the many benefits of travel, the stories that connect us, the perspective it gives us, and of course, the food. Here's to many exciting adventures in the not so distant future. Enjoy the discussion.
Thank you, Rachel. All right, gonna get to share my screen. Share and move down. All right, here we go. All right, we're off to Iberia, to see Spain and Portugal. And by the way, I'm sitting in front of the old lady of Alcalá. She's a street vendor painted by Giovanella, who was came from Madrid with my father, and with it, the guitar that we'll mention in a bit. So this is what we're going to do tonight. We're going to take a road trip around the Iberian Peninsula. We're actually going to start down in Seville, in Algeciras, I'm sorry, in Andalusia, excuse me. Going to start down in the province of Andalusia and go around to Granada and up to Barcelona and across and pick up a little bit of the Camino trip that Eileen and I did up in Galicia. And then we're going to head right down the coast into Portugal. We're going to go partway down to a lot of places that a lot of people don't visit. A lot of people just pop in and out of Lisbon, but we're going down and then we're going to come back through Spain and end our trip in Madrid. Let's start in Sevilla. The dance of Andalusia for the past 500 years has been the flamenco. Picture a bullfighter without altering his proud stance, then trade his soft flats for boots with sturdy heels, remove his hat and place him in front of a gypsy woman who stares at him with steely fixation. She swirls her billowing skirt of her red dress. She snaps open her fan. They begin a sexual conversation of stomps and claps and passes by each other, just as the matador fiercely challenges the bull. He strums flamenco music. She lifts her arms overhead and begins snapping her fingers in the traditional manner or clicking her castanets. Viva Sevilla, vivan los sevillanos y sevillanas, goes the song. And then it comes into Viva Triana in recognition of the Seville suburb called Triana across the Guadalquivir River, with shops selling azulejos and serving almorejo soup, which is a kind of pure gazpacho with the addition of eggs and ham. Triana is considered the birthplace of flamenco dancing, originating within the poor gypsy working class. If you haven't been to Seville since 2004, you won't have seen the Metropole Parasol. It's the largest wooden structure in the world. When they were digging the Parasol, they found a lot of remains of the Romans and Moorish uh, people's uh, existence in that, right in that very spot. And so they created a museum underground so you can see them. And the upper levels are markets and plazas. I have to get ready to go in the cathedral here. Okay. Seville's cathedral is the largest Gothic church in the world, stealing that honor from the cathedral we visited together in Turkey, the Hagia Sophia. The son of Ferdinand and Isabel was baptized here. The interior is so vast and impressive, it just took my breath away. The adjoining tower, La Giralda, is a minaret, like the minaret in Marrakesh. It's one of the longest remaining minarets from the 12th century, the Berber Muslim dynasty. Nearby is the Royal Alcázar, the palace where the royal family still stay when they visit Seville. I was most looking forward to Seville on my first trip to Andalusia in Spain, but Granada won my heart, and Eileen's going to talk about Granada in just a minute. But first, before we get there, we're going to make a stop at Jerez de la Frontera. I say Jerez, even though it's Jerez with a Z, because as you know, Castilian pronounces the Z and the soft C as a TH in English. So this is the Jerez de la Frontera. If you love horse riding and wine, visit Jerez in May. It's a little over an hour from Seville, and we saw the Andalusian horses dancing their perfect dressage. Then it was time for the tabancos, the bars, like the bars that serve tapas and wine, and you can buy wine at a tabanco. And I have to explain something too, very interesting, that on top of your glass of wine, the old tradition was to put a piece of bread with the topping on the bread on top of the wine. And that's to keep the flies from stealing what you paid for. But then you take it off and you eat your tapa. The grapes that the sherry comes from in Jerez is sherry. The grapes that Jerez produces, the sherry wines there, are wonderful. And there's quite a variety. And the grapes love the dry, hot climate there. We're going to hurry through town and get to, here we go. Get down to the coast. If you noticed in the map at the beginning, Spain makes a very pointed dip at the bottom. And if you get on a ferry there and head south, in less than an hour, you'll be in Africa. There's not a big reason to spend a lot of time in these seaside towns from my point of view. But once you get over to Africa, you're landing in Tangier, and you could circle all of Morocco in a few days to see Casablanca and Rabat and Marrakesh. But we tasted the flavor of Morocco in 24 hours and picked up some exquisite leather goods and my favorite antique snake bracelet. Let's move on to Cordoba, where I bought my traditional nylon string guitar. Europe's first university was created in Cordoba. The one I attended was in Madrid at the University of Madrid. The Alcázar de los Reyes Cristianos, the palace fortress of the Christian kings, is a beautiful place to wander. So why do I have Garcia Lorca's name here? Well, Garcia Lorca is the most famous Spanish poet, and he wrote probably his most famous poem about Cordoba. And I'm going to tell you in English, and then I'm going to tell you in Spanish because it's very short, and I think you'll be able to pick out some of the words even if you don't speak Spanish. He wrote Cordoba, far away and alone, black steed, big moon, and olives in my backpack. Although I know the roads, I will never arrive in Cordoba. In Spanish, it reads beautifully, Córdoba, lejana y sola, jaca negra, luna grande, y aceitunas en mi alforja. Aunque sepa los caminos, yo nunca llegaré a Córdoba. Eileen loves Córdoba too. Eileen.
Yeah, so the picture you're seeing of Cordoba is a very different one than I encountered in my first view of Cordoba. We had traveled south out of Madrid through Toledo. We had a long drive along brown land, occasionally interspersed with some groves of olive trees. And suddenly the view changed, and what we saw was a skyline that looked like dazzling white beehives. This was a throwback to the Moorish architecture. The Moors had been in Cordoba for several centuries in the Middle Ages. We arrived in mid-afternoon and there was only time to see one of the 4 World Heritage sites that are in Cordoba. That's an important little factoid because no other place in the world has more World Heritage sites than Cordoba. Imagine. It's not on the A list for tourists necessarily in Spain today, but it should be. So we had an opportunity to pick one, and we chose to go and see the Great Mosque of Cordoba. This is an amazing cathedral-sized building, and it has all of the requisite Moorish Muslim architectural features, but it also has something else. Um, it has an acre of pillars that lead one to a corner where, and I told you it's a huge space. So in one of the corners, there is a Catholic cathedral. It gives you a sense of the size of the place. Um, so the pillars had certainly commanded our eyes, but our stomachs were rumbling. It had been a long drive and we were hungry. So we headed off to our modern day Parador for our lodging that evening. They had a restaurant there, and I just want to share the funny story. We were hungry, so when the waiter came along, we ordered everything. We ordered garlic soup, which Marshall proclaimed magnificent, and he's been trying to reproduce that ever since. We ordered a pasta middle dish and the entree. And then we said, because we were really hungry, we said to the waiter, oh, and bring us some appetizers. The Spanish word for appetizer is entremeses. Well, were we surprised? The waiter came and there were 26 little plates that arrived. Eggs and sausages and vegetables and a disappearing tablecloth. So you can imagine that by the time the pasta and entree came along, all we could do was groan. So that was our big experience, our food experience in Cordoba. Pat mentioned Sevilla. We drove through Sevilla quickly, stopping to see some of the lacy ironwork, but we didn't linger because we were anxious to get to our next stop, Granada. This was to be my very favorite Spanish town on this trip. It's such an exotic town. It has the souk, the Arab market in the square near the cathedral. And then it has caves with gypsies across the ravine. It has the incomparable beauty of the Alhambra and its gardens. And then it has the Sierra Nevada mountains as a backdrop. We were a month too early for the evening concerts that take place in the Alhambra's gardens, but we did enjoy an evening tour at the Gypsy Caves, alive with dancing and just a frisson of fear. Do we have pictures, Pat?
Yes. Yeah.
That's the Alhambra. And there we are in the Gypsy Caves. I don't think our fellow jumped quite as high, but it was a good show. So in the Middle Ages, Granada had a large population of Sephardic Jews until Ferdinand and Isabella told them to leave. As if keeping an eye on their diaspora decree, the royal sovereigns lie buried in Granada's cathedral, close to the sarcophagus holding the remains of their explorer, one Christopher Columbus. And yet another famous resident of the town was the poet Garcia Lorca. He who had spent his life creating beauty met a horrific end. Here's the story. During the Spanish Civil War, he was an overnight guest at a home whose owner was wanted by Franco's followers. And a patrol of soldiers raided the home, and finding the owner missing, they snatched the guest. They made Garcia Lorca dig his own grave and then shot him. So the town has found a way to honor their dead poet. Today, Granada's airport carries his name.
All right, on our way back up north and to the coast, we're going to swing inward to the plains of Spain and recognize the other most famous, I think, author, Miguel de Cervantes, who wrote, who knows what Cervantes wrote? Little clue here. Okay, yes, Don Quixote, the Man of La Mancha. And
Sorry.
I know you can sign up for his tour. I did not, but certainly have read him in Spanish class. So you can take a tour over the plains and past the windmills and follow Don Quixote on his horse Rocinante, which means old nag. And then ride along with him as he dreams of fair maidens and travels with his peasant Sancho Panza, who rides on a donkey. And the quixotic character, imitating heroes he has read about, goes mad and dwells in a fictional world where he cannot separate reality from fiction. His antics were considered hilarious in the 17th century.
Barcelona. Isn't that a beautiful picture there? And it comes with a room full of stories. So I've had the good fortune to visit Barcelona twice, both times as the beginning point for a Mediterranean cruise. Barcelona is known for many things. Its port linking it to the Mediterranean Sea, its Basque culture where even the language seems slippery, great food, a famous pedestrian street named Las Ramblas, which is alive with shops and restaurants and mimes in colorful garb. There's the Ramblas. But perhaps it is now most famous for its native son, Antoni Gaudí, the architect whose free-flowing style was unlike anything that had come before. Tourists crawl all over Guelph Park, a hilltop full of colorful, sometimes surreal sculptures. But his masterpiece is what you're looking at. This is La Sagrada Familia, a basilica wrapped in amazing facts. It took 150 years to open its doors, a longer time than it took to build the Egyptian pyramids. It's the tallest religious building in Europe. And when finished, it will have 18 towers, one for each apostle, 4 for the gospel writers, 1 for Mary, and of course, a large one for Christ. The church's architectural wizardry offers up self-taught degrees in theology, botany, and the arts. The outside drips with stories in stone. Here are 3 facades named Nativity Passion, Facade, and Glory. And Gaudí used nature as his inspiration inside. So you're seeing a picture of the interior now. He would hang a weighted string from the ceiling to see how the natural arches would form. And from that, he would create pillars that resembled trees. There's also a tortoise and turtle holding up these pillars, representing both the earth and the sea. We entered the nave in late afternoon, and sunlight was streaming through the rose window above the high altar, and the light danced across the vast space, colored energy casting this golden glow upon these magnificent pillars. The effect was stunning. If you ever want to visit La Sagrada Familia, go in late afternoon. It remains my all-time favorite church. And Barcelona is on the water, as I mentioned. It has the port. It also has wonderful beaches, La Playa. And some of us got to take a swim early the next day.
Okay. Who has ever done a pilgrimage? I can't see you, but if you've done a pilgrimage, you'll know about the Camino de Santiago. There's a cathedral up in northwest Spain, right up here, that's that's called the Santiago. That's up in Santiago. I'm sorry, and we take a pilgrimage there. We did a pilgrimage from about this spot to the cathedral, but there people coming to this cathedral from all over Europe and coming in, joining some of these routes. Backpackers, most of them are backpackers. We were not backpackers. We spent 10 days on the Camino, walking 8 to 12 miles a day through eucalyptus forests and up hills and across streams and past farms and through fields of sunflowers. And as the pilgrims pass each other, they wave and say, Buen Camino. Eileen likes to tell the stories of some of the people we met on the way.
Oh, they were wonderful and very diverse. Pat actually met a young lady from California who was about to be married, and she eschewed all of the month-long preparations for a wedding, deciding instead to go off to the French Pyrenees and walk across the top of Spain to be a pilgrim heading for Santiago de Compostela. I met an Irishman who, although he had lived his whole life in Ireland, carried a British passport because his mom happened to have been in London at the time that she gave birth. He's never been able to get his Irish passport. He was complaining to me. He was also telling me about the travails that Brexit has induced. A lot of Northern Irish companies are trying to get passports so that they can do business with Brexit still. And then I met a Belgian man who was 73 at the time, and he was telling me that he's walking the Camino in segments. And when he turns 75, he will do the last leg, and he will continue on to the end of the earth town called Finisterre. Um, I think the most memorable, go back to the Camino, my dear.
Sure.
The most memorable person that I saw was an old blind woman walking the Camino. Can you imagine? And she was on the arm of her granddaughter. And that was just a beautiful sight to see and gave us pause, of course. So,
We
did you have something to say about the Camino, Pat?
Yeah, I just wanted to say we used a company that took care of our luggage and took us out to dinner at not this place here, beautiful places and places where we could spend the night. We had wonderful food and beautiful accommodations in Spanish manor houses. Um, and one thing that we did along the way was stop in every town. I'm going to try to show you this and this is our passport for the Camino. And we had our passports stamped in every town at a bar or a restaurant. And you need to take your passport to Santiago de Compostela, and outside the cathedral, there's an office that trades your passport for a credential. There's a treasured credential that verifies that you've completed the pilgrimage. Eileen has hers beautifully framed. Do you have it there with you?
I don't know.
Okay. And the final profound experience, once you get to the Cathedral of Santiago de Compostela, is to experience the Pilgrim's Mass. Eileen, tell us about that.
Yeah, so this Pilgrim's Mass happens every day at noon. The cathedral is filled. The priests enter, and before you, you see this giant metal object. It's called a botafumeiro in Spanish. A miniature-sized one of those we know as censers in the Catholic Church. They still use them to throw the incense during a high mass. This fellow is 175 pounds. Why so large, you ask? Well, in medieval times, the pilgrims had been out walking for months at a time, I guess, and they didn't bathe, and so the smell was quite horrific apparently. And the thought was that the more incense, the better, because it would hide the other smells. So there's a story about this wonderful Botafamero. Um, when Catherine of Aragon was heading to England to become the queen to marry the prince there and gradually become queen, she stopped in Santiago on her way west. And while she was there, they were swinging the Botafamero, and it went through one of the top windows and crashed through outside. And I thought that she should have known that that was a bad omen and not to keep going, but she didn't. But the show today that we were in the Pilgrim's Mass, there were 8 men in medieval crimson garb who are managing the swinging. And so what happens is that they tug on ropes and redirect the direction. Um, the Botafamero plunges up and plunges down, and then it begins to swing. And at its apex, it is covering the whole roof of the cathedral, almost 400 feet. Um, and it came very close to the bottom as it passed over us. We were in the front row.
You're
We were
ducking.
all ducking and bobbing as this thing was swinging.
Our
Quite
first,
a show.
yeah, our first travel party, we talked about the Camino, so we could talk about it for a whole hour. And before we move on to Pontevedra.
Yes. So after we left Santiago de Compostela, Pat and I drove just a little bit west to Finisterre. We had to see what the medieval cartographers had declared to be the end of the world.
Mhm.
It was a humble little fishing town, sort of filled with gray rocks. It was not very welcoming, and we moved on. Our Spanish guide had told us that Pontevedra was a nice city to see, so we checked in for lunch in Pontevedra, and we didn't see anything very unusual about it. It was an unexceptional lunch in an unexceptional square, and we were about to head on when I passed a sign that notified us that there was a building for the Chamber of Commerce. So
And you know,
Pat and
Eileen
I
is
met through the
Castellan.
chamber, and I said, let's just go in and say hello, which was a great thing that we did because the lady there was very accommodating. She was delighted to hear our story, and she told her fellow coworkers she was leaving for the day, and she provided us with a 2-hour private tour into the old town of Pontevedra, which turned out to be a marvelous experience. Beautiful architecture. They have an opera house there. This is the base for the Albarino Wine Company. And there's a cathedral there, the Cathedral de Santa Maria, so named for Columbus because Pontevedra claims that Columbus was born in this town. 3 other towns also make that claim.
From there, we went to Vigo, and Vigo. You can go, you can be on the coast or you can be in town. Actually we didn't quite know if we were in Spain or Portugal. It's a beautiful seaside town on the southern edge of Galicia. There's a Citroën factory there. We didn't place any orders. We did tour the tiny craft markets for souvenirs for our friends. Really good bargaining and interesting handicrafts. It must have been lunchtime because we got to sample mussels and clams in wine sauce and their special octopus, accompanied again by Albarino wine. Steve had suggested, Eileen, or somebody suggested that we send out a suggestion on the next travel party, what kind of wine to buy to have at our party.
Okay,
Okay.
well, we will answer that later. It's a surprise.
So here we are in Portugal, in Ponte de Lima, one of Portugal's oldest towns. It has a medieval bridge. Look at that bridge, and it comes with a story. And look at the soldiers on the bottom left. Many moons ago, when the Roman troops were marching through Portugal, they reached the river Lima, but they refused to cross. And the area was so enchanting that they concluded that this had to be the River Lethe, famous not only for its beauty, but for its ability to wipe out the memories of anyone who crossed it. The only way the captain could persuade his soldiers to that they wouldn't forget everything if they crossed the river was to cross it by himself and then call them each over one at a time by name. So this explains why alongside the river there are wooden models of wooden soldiers right there in the Riverside Park. For many centuries, the stone bridge was the only way to cross the river, and thereby the town was baptized Ponte de Lima, meaning Bridge of Lima. Later in medieval times, wandering bands of pilgrims traveled the Portuguese Camino from Porto, which is south of where we are right now, back up to Santiago de Compostela, to the cathedral. So Eileen and I spent delightful midday wandering both sides of the town and across the long hike across the bridge. And we came across a red brick building with a toy museum. And to the left, there was an international garden festival because Ponte de Lima is the garden capital of Portugal. And we walked in the park and there was a gymnastic circuit. So we, in addition, did some of the gymnastic circuit. And then we lunched al fresco on the town's main plaza and continued our way to Porto. This is more gardens of Ponte de Lima.
So Porto has become one of my favorite towns in all of Europe. I didn't have any expectations, and so the thrill of it made it even better. You have here a collage of pictures. The city comes in two halves, sliced by the River Douro. And so the picture on the left is the new town, if you will. It's the business town. Um, at the top, you will see one or more of the bridges, which I will talk about. Um, and then you will see some of the public buildings and kind of on the bottom left here, it's very hilly on both sides, and so there's a steep climb and lots of red roofs and white buildings that come into play. So let me tell you about Porto. We had found a lovely hotel on the waterfront, and later we wandered this dark path riverside to a wonderful bodega for our evening meal. Each course matched to a different wine, port wine. The next morning, we went into the business section and toured a curious palace, one never lived in by royalty. This was the Bolsa, or the Stock Exchange Palace. The commercial barons had built it in order to bedazzle guests and promote their wines. The tour guide stopped before a set of closed doors and announced that we would probably not remember all that we had seen thus far, but that we would certainly remember the next room. He opened the doors onto this stunning palatial salon that was a copy of a room in the Alhambra. Its walls are covered with graceful scrolls, and that became its own story. The local bishop discovered that the scrolls were actually Arabic prayers, so he ordered the barons to remove the scrollery. The barons solemnly agreed to consider the matter. The next day, they sent the bishop a message informing him that their money had built the room, the scrolls were staying. That afternoon, Pat and I went over to the Old Town side. This is a different world lined with caves and tasting rooms. And we worked our way upward, breathing hard, sampling and touring. After our exertions, we rested with a sunset cruise on the river, the better to see the splendid set of 7 bridges, each of a different design. Halfway along the town's edge lies the Atlantic Ocean, and the town had thoughtfully placed parks and walking paths along a several-mile shoreline. We spent our final morning walking along the ocean. They had these occasional small bars that came with cushy chaises to relax in and enjoy the view. We ordered coffees and enjoyed the view. We loved Porto. And then it was time to go back to Spain and the last leg of our journey. And our drive took us through hours of more hardscrabble brown land before we reached Salamanca, home of the third oldest university in Western Europe. In Renaissance times, its thought leaders transformed the judicial landscape, creating morality concepts such as right to life, economic rights, and spiritual rights, even including freedom of thought and theology. The university surrounds a gargantuan plaza, the size of a football field. Its scale caused a small earthquake in my mind. It was just enormous. And from there, we moved to Avila.
Avila, medieval walls with 88 turrets comprise the largest lighted monument in the world. Don't you love when you travel? It's always the largest, the oldest, the best of everything. The walls were built to protect this World Heritage City. Two extremes of fame from different centuries are buried here. I'm going to mention the first one, Torquemada, the Grand Inquisitor. The Spanish Inquisition was the cruel period in the 15th century where the heretics were tortured, hung, or burned at the stake. And the penitents even had to wear a sanbenito, a gown over their clothes that identified them. Did you know that kids now have a video game based on the movie Assassin's Creed, where the protagonist is named Torquemada? But let's move happily to the next century when Santa Teresa was born, Santa Teresa de Jesus or Santa Teresa of Avila. She was born in the mid 16th century. I just want to share, if any of my fellow undergrads are online, that we had a passionate young Spanish teacher who would stand outside the classroom before coming in and pace and enter almost sweating with this passion, and seemed to channel the spirit of Santa Teresa. She was the Carmelite nun and mystic from Avila. We read her description of the soul's journey to God, saying, Christ has no body but yours. Yours are the hands with which Christ blesses the world. Santa Teresa subsisted on public alms and lived in a cell. She identified with the saints and experienced visions of supernatural and mystic ecstasies. A bit like our 20th century Mother Teresa of Calcutta, she also tended to the sick and destitute. She blanketed them with comfort with this: let nothing disturb thee, let nothing dismay thee. All things pass, God never changes. There she is.
So our last stop before heading back to the airport was the town of Segovia, which I had heard about all through my life. I wanted to see it. It had a reputation of being a special town, and indeed it was. Our entry into Segovia was a bit dramatic, though. We had been traveling with a GPS that, when it reached the town, decided to play, well, it wasn't behaving well. And so, following its directions, it took us down into a pedestrian mall, a large one, and we had to drive across the entire stretch of this avenue before reaching this Roman aqueduct wall. Now, the spaces are not terribly large in between each of the pillars, but it was the only way out. And so we very carefully positioned the car and slowly drove through, reaching the road on the other side. When we told the concierge at our hotel later about our experience. He clapped his hands to his head and started whispering, Dios míos. That's what we felt too. So there were wonderful things to see in Segovia. Um, the Alcázar is the royal palace built on a stone peninsula between the rivers. Um, you can see its magical turrets. Its facade actually has conjured up fairy tales, and indeed, Disney modeled his castle on the Alcázar. We entered it through a long garden and toured its rooms, which included a well-stocked armory. It had beautiful balconies from which to observe the town. And then, it being towards 5 o'clock, we headed off to mass at the cathedral. The Segovia Cathedral is considered a masterpiece of Basque Castilian Gothic architecture, and it's known as the Lady of Cathedrals. Um, we were among the first out the door at the mass's end and found window seats in a nearby restaurant where we could assure ourselves of a seat. And we were in a nice window alcove, so we got to watch most of Segovia's parishioners pour out the door and wander down the streets. It was a fitting conclusion, I thought, to a country that basks in its Catholicism. And then we went on to Madrid.
On the way to Madrid, the I need to talk about the royalty. The Spain is ruled by a prime minister, Pedro Sanchez, and by the king, Felipe VI. His full name is Felipe Juan Pablo Alonso de Todos los Santos de Borbón y Grecia. I love that. He was born in 1968 and became king in 2014. He is head of state and commander of the armed forces. Some subjects were critical because he married a commoner but beautiful journalist. You can see them on the right if you can move our heads around by moving the top of that rectangle. And she is Leticia Ortiz Rosca Solano, and their daughter is the heir apparent. But let's go back one generation from Felipe to Felipe is the son of Juan Carlos, and you can see Juan Carlos at the bottom there. He was born in 1938. I met Juan Carlos in 1962 when he was 24 and I was a student at the University of Madrid. My father had an office there, and we were invited to a dinner party at his father's lakeside country estate. After there's a whole story there, but I'll just move to after dinner. The lively music urged us to dance, and Juan asked me to teach him the new American dance, the twist. So so I did, and it was fun. And later on, who'd have guessed, Prince Juan Carlos became Spain's king from 1975 to 1914. But let's go back one more generation. Juan Carlos is the son of Juan de Borbón. Go back one more generation. Juan de Borbón is the son of somebody you know, Francisco Franco. The general and dictator, Francisco Franco, ruled over Spain from 1939 until his death. He rose to power during the bloody Spanish Civil War when, with the help of Nazi Germany and fascist Italy, his nationalist forces overthrew the democratically elected Second Republic. Valle de los Caídos, this basilica was built to honor him. It was his burial place and signified the end of his reign. But guess what? Last year, with public outcry about honoring a dictator, his remains were removed. Well, we can't cover the wealth of Madrid, and we're on our way there, but we can't cover the wealth of it in a few minutes any more than we could even cover New York City briefly. But I want you to know that I believe Madrid is a very stately city with wide boulevards and spectacular, elegant statuary and spacious roundabouts. The Plaza Mayor on the left there is a place to wander in the evening and relax at a cafe, or on the right, you can wander at Puerta del Sol. The Royal Palace is the place, is the 18th century required visit with a vast neoclassical facade and Doric columns, actually based on drawings that the Italian sculptor Bernini designed for the Louvre. The heads of state still meet here, and down in the bottom left in the majestic throne room. On the top left, you see Las Ventas. That's the bull ring. Yes, Las Ventas is a host to many events, tennis tournaments, expositions, and in the summer to bullfights. And bullfighting still exists there in Spain and Portugal. The fountain that you see the top of in the big picture and the bottom of in the bottom picture left is a beautiful marble sculpture. And Cibeles, this fountain originally provided the drinking water for the residents of Madrid. Along the Calle de Alcalá, I told you I've got the old lady from Alcalá here. There's a beautiful park, Parque Buen Retiro on the right, and the Puerta de Alcalá is on the left. I was fortunate when I lived in Madrid to be able to frequent the Prado Museum, which boasts the largest collection of the works of Spanish artist Diego Velasquez. Can't get my lips working tonight. Diego Velasquez and Francisco Goya. And they're an enormous collection there. You probably recognize the work of Velasquez, and this is Las Meninas. And here's a Goya. This is the clothed Maja Maha on the right. There's a naked one as well. I didn't put that one in. And Bosch, I'd forgotten about Bosch, and so I wanted to include a picture, a painting of Bosch. This is El Dos de Mayo in Madrid. Goya, Goya moved us in this painting from the calm of the Renaissance. There's the Puerta del Sol in the background, to almost like a photograph showing the chaos during the invasion of Napoleon, when the Madrileños poured onto the streets to defend their city. So while we know well that Mexico celebrates the Cinco de Mayo, Spain takes its holiday every Dos de Mayo. And that's where we get out of our cars and head to the airport. Eileen is going to talk to us about what's next before we open our party, and we can all talk together.
Well, we did have a couple we have one question that came in.
Right.
Somebody said, where did you stay when you were on the Camino?
We stayed
in manor homes.
We stayed every night in a different beautiful hacienda, manor home, beautiful places. And we'll be glad to talk more about, Steve records all our, I don't know that we mentioned the names of that manor homes though. I'd have to ask the tour operator that we used for the names of them, but they were fabulous.
They are, of course, named in our book, Rome. Just saying.
And then Sheila asks, did you lose your memory when you crossed the border?
Just our minds. Memory was okay.
Eileen's going to tell you what's next, and then I'm going to ask you all for a little bit of to give us some stories on a particular subject.
Can we go on to gallery view at this point?
Yeah. So I'm just going to bring everybody over, if you don't want to turn your camera on, then just don't turn it on. But I'm going to bring everybody over and we can have our little party here. And then Pat, I would just unshare your screen so everybody gets a little bit better look at each other.
Got it.
Great. I want to give a shout out to some of my friends. Jim Dool, whom Pat knows, is on, maybe Carrie's with him. And Claudia Burns, who I worked with at WGMS ages and ages ago, is with us. Thank you, Claudia. I see Art Anseline. Hi. Oh, very nice.
We have
lots and lots of people. Welcome all. So we wanted to tell you.
Too.
What's that?
We have some volleyball stars here too.
Oh, wonderful. It's quite the crowd. So we're going to have a party for our next venture. You know, March is known as the Irish month, and so 17th, St. Patrick's Day, is wildly popular in this country, and the pubs are full and overflowing, usually. But this is the pandemic year continuing, and that won't be what's happening. But we wanted to create a substitute, so we're going to have an Irish party. We're going to have a lot of Blarney tales. We will be traveling around the countryside, but we'll also be sharing some stories, some of them funny, some of them momentous, and some of them told by leprechauns. We have a special guest joining us, and we will be telling you more. So somebody asked what kind of wine we should be. I suggest Guinness for this one.
Yes, Guinness. Yes, Guinness.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's gonna be it's gonna be a real party. Steve's got some party tricks up his sleeve, and so just bring your friends and come back. If any of your friends want to join us and they're not on the monthly invitation list, just send us their email. Anyway, I want to be sure to thank Steve again, our brilliant conference and webinar producer, and Anoop Mitra's cruise planners and American Express Travel, and our newest supporter, the Mather, for the place to return home after each trip. Now, let's talk. I want to know if any of you have been to any of the Spanish islands, because we haven't. Have you been to Ibiza or Tenerife or the Portuguese islands of Madeira?
I've been to Mallorca.
Nancy. Oh, Nancy Costa, tell us.
I've been to Tenerife.
Good. Was it good? Was it a good trip?
It's beautiful. It was many, many, many years ago, but it was really beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
Volcanic black beaches. Very cool.
Too dark in here.
Okay. Does anyone else have any questions or any experiences to share?
I can turn the light on out here.
Just whispering.
How many of you have actually been to Spain?
Yeah, showing up.
A number of you. Good. Good. We went in May the first time, and it was perfect weather before it got too hot, and the beaches were lovely.
Yeah, that's very interesting.
I wondered if anybody had been to the concerts in the Alhambra Gardens.
No.
No. It remains one of my unfulfilled dreams.
Ah.
I want to go back.
Yeah.
You wanna
Well,
put the pictures on, is that the story?
What if you put the big square on? No, that's make
Hey, Jim, Carrie, your wife walked the Camino, you said.
Yeah, can you hear me?
I
Yes.
can.
Good. Yeah, she did it with her sister and her mother. They started about halfway over and went over to Castellano or wherever it was. Had a great trip, beautiful weather. And she sent me pictures every day. So I was making an album for her when she returned.
Oh, how
Very
nice.
cool.
it'll get bigger.
That's very cool.
Are there any would-be pilgrims amongst you?
Mhm.
Any other pilgrimages?
It's really not that bad. You can walk 11 miles a day and survive,
can
I
use your
promise.
Yeah, we didn't train for it, but when you're,
Mary did.
oh, Jeff and Mary, yes.
Mary, did you walk it or you
No,
want to
no.
walk it?
We did not walk it. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
But we did visit our friend, our priest friend, who was the dean of the Episcopal Cathedral in Madrid. And she lived there, and we stayed with her for 5 days in Madrid. And then we went to Sevilla, Cordoba, and Granada. And we went to
Segovia.
Segovia. And she just died about a month ago. And so this was very special to take. We are sitting here with our book of our trip. Very special to see some of the places that
Yeah.
we
I'm
had.
sorry for your loss. I know she was a special person in your life.
She really was. So it was. We didn't go on any of the paths or anything, the Camino, but we did go on a spiritual
It
experience.
was a form of mistletoe.
Yeah, it was a form of, yeah.
Mhm.
Pat,
Yes.
I wish you talk a little bit about those artists in Barcelona like Dali, Picasso, Miro. They have so much in Barcelona.
You should have asked me that after I finished my art history course.
Mostly like Dali, so
Yes.
crazy, surrealist and all that. Yeah.
So you love art, huh?
Oh yeah, I live in Spain maybe for 10 years and I go every year. So
Mm.
In Toledo, there is a museum devoted to El Greco.
oh yes.
And
Yeah, it's
she
very
has
good one.
portraits
Mhm.
of the apostles. And the one of St. Peter has him holding the keys to the kingdom. And the reason I'm bringing this up is that my husband decided to venture down the hill to a church in the valley. And when he got there, the front door was locked. But an old groundskeeper came by and said, "Oh, would you like to see inside?" And my husband said, "Yes." And he pulled out his keys, and they were the same keys as in the portrait.
I'd like to know, one thing I'd like to know as we plan ahead is any places that you'd like to have us talk about, or any destination you'd like to be part of presenting with us. Looking for doing a conglomerate of visits to national parks, because that's been a request we've received. So if you have any good experiences, pictures, let me know, send me an email. And if you'd like to be part of helping us do that kind of presentation.
And I'm thinking of Argentina.
Yeah.
Has anybody been down there, or anybody
Yes.
want to go?
Yes, absolutely.
Yes.
Nancy.
I know Nancy's been to Antarctica. That was.
Yeah, Nancy gets around. Nancy was with us on the Camino.
Yeah.
Has anyone been to the Ukraine or any of the countries of the old USSR?
Yes.
Was that one thing you're interested in, or that you have visited?
Well, yes, I'm interested just because we knew so little about it before that time, and I knew some natives from the Ukraine very well until they passed away. And my sister-in-law is from St. Petersburg.
My aunt was Ukrainian. She came over when she was 5, so she spoke the language. But no, I haven't been there.
Okay, just wondered.
Well, thank you all for coming. It's been a joy to have you with us on Friday night, and the last Friday in February, we're gonna have a big Guinness party. And
Sounds good.
Madly looking for the date. It's February 26th.
Ah.
So we look forward to seeing all of you again for some big surprises. Have your Guinness ready, and we'll rock.
Excellent.
salud.
Sounds good.
Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you.
you. Adios, amigos.
Adios.
Adiós, amigos, compañeros de mi vida.
Salud, amor y pesetas y tiempo para gastarlas.
That sounds so sexy when you say that.
What did she really say?
Oh, Eileen or Pat, have anybody been to China? Any part of it?
Yes, we both have.
Ah, that might be interesting.
Yes. So that I'd love to do that. I've been wanting to get my statue, my Chinese warrior in the picture.
Well, you know, I don't know when you went, I don't know how much of China we're allowed to see when we go.
Yeah, I'm excited because to read that they're thinking of doing a maglev train from Washington to Baltimore in 15 minutes, because we rode the new one in China from Shanghai to the airport, and it was a crazy experience. Yeah, but that, of course, that's not what it's all about. It's all about the history of China. Yeah,
We could easily do a Chinese program. Pat and I had different itineraries. I did Beijing, Xi'an, and Guangzhou. You did Shanghai and what were the two intermediates that you did?
Oh, Beijing and two cities in between. We flew to. Yeah.
That might be interesting.
Yeah, I think. Okay, good.
One idea anyway.
We'll put it down. We're working ahead.
Well, that part of the world, you know, might be good to. I've not been. My husband was, and my cousins and so forth. So,
Okay.
and I do have friends who are first generation Chinese American. So I have a little bit of interest in knowing a little bit about what it's about. But my cousin was, when she went, was of course thrilled with this. Was some years ago now. But my question has always been, how much are we allowed to see? Which, you know.
I didn't feel shut out when I went. We took a chamber delegation there, and we went in through the Forbidden City, and it, you know, we didn't see the mind reform camps, but
yeah, well, in the Western provinces, you mean?
We were there the year
out
year
of the
before
country.
Hong Kong reverted to Chinese rule.
Oh, okay.
We saw a different Hong Kong than the one that's there today.
I imagine, yes.
And Rachel, thank you so much.
Yes, Rachel, nice to meet you.
Wanted to say to us?
Yes, this was so fun. I studied abroad in Nottingham, England, but then in between like finals and the end of classes, I was able to travel for a month, and so I got to spend some time I went to Feria in Seville and got lost in Madrid. So this brought back a lot of good memories, adventures.
Oh, that's interesting.
Huge grand tour, lucky us, huh?
I was there so many years ago. I don't remember very much of it, but this was nice to see. I just it was, like I say, so many years ago, and it was a bus trip, so I think I missed a lot.
We like that. We like renting a car. We did, except for when we inadvertently drove through the aqueduct.
Oh dear.
But one thing that we could drive to that I've been working on, well, you can't really drive to if you can't get into Canada, is a trip to Nova Scotia. And my husband's best friend has a home up there, and he's a great storyteller. So Eileen, I wanted you to hear this, that I talked to him today, to Bob Leib, and I said, come on, Bob, I want you to talk about Nova Scotia. He said, oh, I can't present. I said, I said, well, like, you know the history. Oh yeah, like Lewisburg. I got these stories, and he started talking about Lewisburg, and I was rolling on the floor. I mean, his stories are so great. So I'm working on it.
Yeah, we should have him as a guest.
Yes.
Guest lecturer.
We'll have a half-hour presentation, and then he can be our guest for the next half
Long
hour.
stories.
Yeah, he has great stories.
Yeah.
Anyway, okay.
All right. Well, thank you all.
Thanks,
Karen, good to
Sharon.
see you.
Everyone, thank
Rachel,
you.
nice
Good
to
to see
meet you.
everyone.